exist for billions of years, but how exactly was water created? Scientists have theorized that hydrogen was formed as the universe was cooling down from the Big Bang. Along with hydrogen, huge stars and galaxies were created, and once they became big enough, they exploded, releasing enormous amounts of energy. With this energy, heavier elements such as oxygen were created, and because both hydrogen and oxygen are highly reactive, they bonded with each other, creating the substance that all life depends on today, water. How water arrived on Earth is a bit of a mystery. One hypothesis is that, like the Moon, water was brought through extraplanetary sources. Comets, trans-Neptunian bodies, or water-rich meteorites could have collided with Earth, effectively transferring water from all the way across the galaxy to us.
However, there is one major flaw in this explanation. The isotope ratios of hydrogen recently tested on asteroids proved to be incompatible with the ratio on our planet.
So how did water end up on Earth? Big history reveals the link between water and the beginnings of the entire universe.
The Big Bang created everything humans and life needed to survive. However, it wasn't until millions of years after that water was able to form on the Earth, and the most plausible theory of how this happened involves the Moon. The impact which is believed to have created the Moon may have also been the key to the formation of water bodies as well. The impact of a meteor would have caused rock vapor to form over the course of 2,000 years, a heavy carbon dioxide atmosphere with hydrogen and water vapor.
The surface temperature of the Earth was under 230 degrees Celsius. Liquid water was still able to condense due to the pressure of a dense carbon dioxide atmosphere, which formed what we know as oceans. So, though it is unlikely that a comet actually brought hydrogen to Earth, it still indirectly caused the development of water.
And with water, oxygen, and an atmosphere came the development of life over 3.8 billion years ago. And with the development of life came, much more recently, the development of Homo sapiens, only 250,000 years in the past. Without it, we would never have evolved into the species we are today, and nor would we see the extreme amount of biodiversity present in modern day.
History and civilization has always revolved around water and water sources for a very simple reason. We need it to survive. Water makes up 2/3 of the human body weight. Just a 2% decrease in internal water can lead to dehydration, and only a 10% loss is considered the limit for survival. In the early stages of civilization, it was critical for the development of a city or even village to have easy access to a fresh water supply for both drinking and farming, which is why we see most early civilizations in settled communities developing near rivers such as those along the Euphrates, Tigris, and Nile. Large rivers like the Yellow River in China became hotspots for civilization due to the banks as well, which provided beneficial conditions for agriculture, especially when it came to soil. These benefits would give small cities the food surpluses required to initiate the beginning of the division of labor among villages, spurring the development of large-scale kingdoms and empires. Without them, most of the characteristics associated with civilization, such as writing, art, and formal government, would most likely not have developed.
However, the same rivers that gave way to modern-day civilization also had serious repercussions for those who didn't have the means to control them.
The flooding cycles of important rivers and the need for water drove many important technological advances, most notably irrigation systems, dams, bridges, and more recently, reservoirs and canals. Flooding could often destroy entire crop harvests along the banks where they were usually planted, and the severity of the consequences led many to believe it was a punishment from the gods. This idea would later evolve into a sign that the mandate of heaven was lost by an emperor in China, and became a central piece of ideology in most other civilizations as well.
Even before the development of civilizations and settled communities, water levels were affecting the course of humanity, from migration to the development of modern-day superpowers. This time, however, it happened on a much larger scale.
During the African diaspora, the movement of hunters and gatherers across the world, our ancestors crossed multiple land bridges, including the Beringia land bridge connecting Alaska to Russia. They were following their food source, and because of this, many nomads traveled along the coasts, sustaining their diet with seafood. However, due to global temperature fluctuation, ocean levels rose, covering these bridges soon after settled communities were formed. This effectively closed off continents such as the Americas and Australia, where native populations would not come into contact with the rest of the world until the late 15th century with the improvement of maritime technology. This 10,000-year isolation will have major consequences, the effects of which are still visible to this day. While technological improvements and urbanization were occurring throughout Eurasia, entire continents were prevented from engaging in this rapid period of collective learning. This put the American and the Australian populations at a severe disadvantage. When they came back into contact, the division between modernized, technologically superior countries and underdeveloped ones was clear.
The results of these separate developments are still present to this day. When Europeans reached the once isolated Americas, their superior weaponry and unfamiliar diseases won out against the Aboriginal population, allowing for Western powers to dominate and exploit the region for over 3 centuries, during which resources, opportunities, and freedoms were stripped from the half of the population who survived. The effects of this exploitation are obvious, even in modern society. The remnants of a racial hierarchy, slavery, and colonies still exist in the form of biases, opportunities, freedoms, and especially economic disparities and dependence on the West. Even the products that colonies were forced to produce are still major Central and Southern American exports. The periods under Europe were spent producing resources for other countries, not doing what most other nations were, which was modernizing, urbanizing, and building infrastructure and stable democracies, a disadvantage due to the rising of water levels and the subsequent closing of land bridges that happened over 10,000 years ago.
But what part of European technology, besides the obvious advantage of weaponry, allowed them to dominate the rest of the world? Big history reveals the connections between centuries of imperialism and technology that began over 100,000 years ago.
In order to reach the Americas, Africas, and Asia, Europeans had to develop efficient and safe ways to travel across the Earth's vast oceans. Up until about 1850 CE, water played a critical role in transportation. Humans used boats for over 100,000 years, starting with a simple raft. These primitive rafts were made out of wood or bamboo and marked the beginnings of the human migration over vast bodies of water. As humans started to travel longer distances over the oceans, boats became more efficient. The canoe and later the lateen sail were developed, allowing humans to navigate the waters more easily than ever. Boats such as dhows and junks became popular trading vessels in the Indian Ocean, and starting from the High Middle Ages, Europeans began copying these designs and adapting and improving them for their own needs. Before the 15th century, however, it was the Chinese who dominated the Indian Ocean basin. But after a long dynasty rule under the Mongols, the Chinese abandoned their voyages, effectively shifting the course of history in favor of the up-and-coming Europeans. For most of history, Europe wasn't a factor. From trade to military campaigns, it was mostly the shifting powers in the Middle East, in particular the Ottomans and in China, who had the biggest effect on the establishment of trade routes and lasting infrastructure. However, after the Manchu dynasty, Europe would be the one to fill the position of the Chinese. While the rest of Eurasia was becoming increasingly insular, Europe was looking outward. It was when advanced maritime technology finally reached Europe that they began to transition into a modern-day superpower. Overseas routes to the Americas, Africa, India, and China effectively cut out the need for land trading routes, establishing Europe as the dominant trading power. This advantage was only facilitated by resources pouring in from the Americas, and it would be Europe's naval strength that would cement their position as the leading world powers into the 21st century.
Venice was a wealthy trading city, reaching its peak during the 17th century. Its location on the Mediterranean Ocean, as well as its position between India, the Islamic empires, and European empires, made it an essential trading port. Venice exported goods that were high in demand globally, such as woolen textiles, agricultural products, and even art, which caused trade to flourish during the Renaissance, and it imported porcelain, spices, and cotton. However, it was mainly its position and ability to be accessed via port that led to its popularity, as maritime trade was quickly becoming the preferred method of transportation and travel.
Though big history enables students to focus on the overarching impacts of a particular topic, which is useful for understanding how specific events or patterns fit into a larger scale of time, the addition of pre-human history makes it difficult to understand how specific events fit into these themes. Chronology is especially lost in this format, and the emphasis placed on science makes other important aspects of history, in particular point of view and human-based change, almost irrelevant.